made this table saw a few years ago and it's served me quite well. Underneath there's just a regular circular saw that I've mounted underneath. So the problem that I'm having is that over the years, from adjusting the angle of the saw blade, I've actually ended up making the cutout there quite wide. So this is particularly an issue when I'm trying to cut something thin and it's going to end up falling down inside. So the plan here is this was just recycled off a piece of old IKEA furniture, and I've got another piece here. So I'm going to take this out, measure the saw blade, and I'm going to try and 3D print a 0 clearance 90-degree cut and a 0 clearance 45-degree, try and avoid this in the future. Actually, why don't I just draw around this while it's attached? That'd be the perfect template. So what I'm thinking is going to need to happen is the plastic insert is going to need to be bigger than the hole, but also I want to put magnets on here to be able to just lift it in and out. And yes, I did think to check before I started that it is magnetic. So the next thing I need to do is work out exactly where the blade is relative to the edges. So to work out how long the groove will need to be, I'm going to measure at the top of this, which will give me the absolute most that this blade will poke through, which is 170 millimeters, or about 6 3/4 inches. So again, I'm just going to allow just a little bit extra. So I'm going to say 18 centimeters or 180 millimeters. So now I think I have it right. Let's just put the saw on exactly where it goes, touch the blade down. So like I said, if I allow just a few millimeters on each side, that'll allow for some error there. This is where I went inside and my son was watching TV, so I thought instead of telling him to be quiet, I'd just do a voiceover. So I measured up the magnets, went and got my compass and drew out the plan on paper first. I thought that would be the easiest way to make measurements to transfer into some 3D modeling software. So I opened up Onshape. I use Onshape because that's the first one I started using, and now I know how to use it. You're not going to change. So I set it out fairly simply, just started with a rectangle, added some circles to the end. It's a pretty basic shape really. Added in the slot, changed the measurements to fit what I'd come up with in the drawing. Extruded it to make it thicker, and then I made the recesses for the magnets to go in. Like I said, quite a simple design. Just made sure I flipped it over so the magnets would be on the bottom. So once I'd come up with the design on Onshape, I exported it to Cura, and that's where I started to have a few issues. So I couldn't find it to start with and realized it was too big to fit on the build plate, so I put it out the side. So I tried to drag it across onto the build plate and rotate it. I thought it's got to print diagonally, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to fit. So I'm trying to find the settings to get rid of the no print zone around the outside. I looked online and you can do it, but man, it was complicated. So I went back into Cura, and before I'd videoed this, I actually discovered if you turn off the snap rotation, I could make smaller adjustments and got it to fit in perfectly. Or so I thought. So I sent that to the 3D printer. And all looked good to start off with. And then I realised quickly that it was probably going to print off the side. At the moment that's just the brim, so it's not part of the thing. But once it started to print I could see it had gone off the edge, cut the corner off. So I cancelled that, back to Cura, and I just edged it across a little bit. And that seemed to be fine. So the next morning, popped it off, glued in the magnets, and I had checked it on the saw here first before I wasted the magnets. But for the sake of the video, magnets in first, and then I went back to the saw. So I was quite happy with that, even made a nice sound. So this is the original baseboard, and I put that back on. I'm going to use that as a template to make the new baseboard. I was going to make a router template, which now afterwards I think probably would have been a good idea, but I thought at the time it's not going to fit on the build plate. I would have had to print it in parts, it'd be annoying. So I thought I'd make the template out of wood. And this is that masking tape and super glue thing I've seen on a number of other YouTube videos. This is the first time I've tried it, but it seemed quite effective. So I was going to cut this out on the router with a flush trim bit against the 3D printed bit. So I cut a hole in there, and as you can see I've put that hard up against the flush trim bearing, and I'm using ply here because I find that when you use a router it doesn't have a grain in one direction that pulls it off course. So I'd already turned the router on there, just trying to feed it through the hole, and I actually thought at the time I did a pretty good job of cutting this. It come out as I thought it would, but that was just the beginning of the problems. So the masking tape and super glue worked well. I glued the template back on to the original, and then I realised, hang on, what have I done? It's like the width of the router a bit too big. So I thought if I use the insert that I'd cut out, that's exactly the same size as the 3D print. I thought if I just cut the edges off that, I can then make a second template. So you can see there I used hot glue instead of super glue on there, and it did move a bit, and as a result you can see here the fit's not perfect. I gave up in the end, so I just went around freehand. And eventually I got that to fit. Probably should have just done that in the first place, saved a lot of time. So I went to transfer the original plate onto the new piece, making sure I got the holes right. So I've made enough mistakes by this stage. Didn't want to make any more. Double check the holes. And this was so that the screw heads would sit flush. Obviously being a table saw, I need everything to float smoothly over the top without any obstructions. And luckily this time got the holes in the right spot, and this part of the project actually went quite smoothly. Check that it still fits in, and then cut a slot so that I knew exactly where the saw was sitting. And I used the score that the saw had made to line up the insert. And as you can see, I went back to the super glue on this one because it did definitely work better than hot glue. So I did make a lot of mistakes in this project, but I've learned a lot of things by watching other people's YouTube, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes here. And that, as you can see, actually went quite well. And back for the final assembly. So I put it all back together. Insert it back into the table. And look at that. Fits very flush. I was very happy with that. And test run. So I've left the gap about 6 millimeters. So in theory, I could cut anything to, maybe 2 or 3 millimeters thick and shouldn't fall down. And the plan from the start was that this one I would be able to take out. This is for a 90-degree cut. And I will eventually make a 45-degree cut, and that can just slot back in. So I'm pretty happy with this project. If you like my video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.